The morning sun painted the small town of Millbrook in golden light. Cosmos Martinez, 47 years old, stood at the glass doors of Millbrook Community Bank. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her security uniform was perfectly pressed. She checked her watch. 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes until the bank opened. This routine had become her life for the past 2 years. After 15 years as a military helicopter pilot, Cosmos now worked as a security guard in this quiet town. The change was dramatic, but necessary. The memories still haunted her. 3 years ago, during her last mission, something terrible had happened. She was flying a rescue helicopter when enemy fire struck them. Her co-pilot was badly hurt, and civilians were in danger. Though she managed to land safely and everyone survived, the trauma was too much. She couldn't fly anymore. The nightmares had lasted for months after her discharge. She would wake up in cold sweats, hearing the sound of metal tearing and engines failing. For a while, she couldn't even drive a car without experiencing panic attacks. The Veterans Affairs counselor had told her it was normal. Post-traumatic stress disorder affected many former military personnel. But knowing it was normal didn't make it easier to live with. She had tried returning to civilian life in the city where she'd grown up, but the noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation made everything worse. A friend from her military unit had suggested small-town life might be more healing. "Find somewhere quiet," he'd said, "somewhere you can breathe again." Millbrook had been a random choice from an internet search. Population 3,200, low crime rate, surrounded by farmland and forests. When she'd driven through town for the first time, something about the tree-lined streets and the way people waved to strangers had felt like coming home. "Good morning, Cosmos," said Janet, the bank manager, as she approached the door with her keys. "Morning, Janet," Cosmos replied with a small smile. "Ready for another peaceful day?" Janet laughed. "In Millbrook? What could possibly happen here?" Janet was 55, a lifelong resident of Millbrook who had worked her way up from teller to manager over 25 years. She had taken a chance on hiring Cosmos despite her lack of traditional security experience. "Military training counts for a lot," Janet had said during the interview. "And this town needs people who understand service." As Janet unlocked the doors, Cosmos took her position near the entrance. She watched people walk by on Main Street. Mrs. Henderson was walking her small dog, just like every morning at exactly 9:03 a.m. Tom the mailman waved as he passed, his route as predictable as clockwork. Everything was normal and quiet. But something caught her eye. A dark blue sedan drove slowly down the street. The windows were tinted, and she couldn't see inside clearly. The car slowed down as it passed the bank, then continued on. Something about it felt wrong. Cosmos had learned to trust her instincts during her military years. This car didn't belong here. In a town of 3,200 people, you quickly learned to recognize what was normal and what wasn't. This sedan wasn't normal. Over the next week, Cosmos saw the same car 3 more times, always driving slowly, always at different times of day. Monday at 10 a.m., Wednesday at 2 p.m., Friday at 4 p.m. She started keeping a log, a habit from her military days. License plate number, out of state, approximate times, direction of travel, number of occupants. The pattern was too regular to be coincidental. "You seem distracted lately," Janet observed on Tuesday morning as they opened the bank together. "Just staying alert," Cosmos replied. "Part of the job." But it was more than that. Her military training had taught her to recognize surveillance patterns. This wasn't random traffic. It was reconnaissance. The question was, reconnaissance for what? On Tuesday of the following week, she saw it again. This time, she noticed the license plate, out of state. The car had 2 men inside, but she couldn't see their faces clearly. Both appeared to be young, probably in their 20s. They wore baseball caps pulled low over their faces. The passenger was pointing at the bank as they drove by. Not casually, deliberately. They were discussing something specific about the building.
"Hey, Janet," Cosmos said during lunch break. "Have you noticed any strangers around town lately?" Janet looked up from her sandwich. "Not really." "Why?" "Just wondering. There's been a car driving by pretty regularly. Probably nothing. But Cosmos knew it wasn't nothing. Her military training had taught her to recognize patterns. This was surveillance, and surveillance usually preceded action. That afternoon, she walked around the bank building during her break, looking at it from an outsider's perspective. What would potential robbers notice? The front entrance was glass, providing clear visibility both in and out. There was a side entrance that led to the offices, but it was locked and alarmed. The back exit opened to an alley, but it had been sealed during recent renovations for security reasons, though few people knew that. She counted security cameras, 4 visible ones, plus 2 hidden ones that most people wouldn't notice. The teller counter was designed with bulletproof glass, but it was older and might not meet current standards. The safe was modern and time-locked, opening only at predetermined hours. If someone were planning a robbery, they would need to know about the time lock. They would need to understand the layout. They would need to plan for multiple exits. All of this would require reconnaissance. Wednesday came and went without the car appearing. Cosmos began to wonder if she was being too paranoid. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe 15 years of military service had made her see threats where none existed. But Thursday morning, the car was back. This time, it parked across the street for nearly 10 minutes. Cosmos watched from inside the bank as the occupants appeared to be taking notes. When a police car turned onto Main Street for its routine patrol, the sedan immediately started up and drove away. That confirmed it. These weren't tourists or lost travelers. They were planning something, and they were specifically avoiding police attention. Thursday morning started normally. Cosmos arrived at 8:50 a.m. as always. She took her position by the door and watched Janet unlock it. The first customers began to arrive. Mr. Peterson making his weekly deposit, Sarah from the flower shop with the day's earnings, Mrs. Chen picking up foreign currency for her upcoming trip to visit her daughter in California. The morning routine was comforting in its predictability. Cosmos had come to appreciate the rhythm of small-town life after years of military unpredictability. Every day in the service had brought new challenges, new locations, new dangers. Here in Millbrook, the biggest excitement was usually the annual Apple Festival or a high school football game. At 10:15 a.m., Cosmos needed to use the restroom. She normally wouldn't leave her post during banking hours, but nature was calling, and the bank seemed exceptionally quiet this morning. "Hey, Eddie," she called to the maintenance worker who was mopping nearby. Eddie was 63, a retired factory worker who picked up part-time jobs around town to supplement his Social Security. He was reliable and observant, exactly the kind of person you could trust to keep an eye on things. "Can you keep an eye on the door for just 2 minutes? I'll be right back." Eddie nodded and propped his mop against the wall. "Sure thing, Cosmos. Take your time." As Cosmos walked toward the back of the bank, she felt uneasy. Her instincts were telling her something was about to happen. Maybe it was the surveillance car she'd been tracking. Maybe it was just paranoia. But her military training had taught her to listen to her gut feelings. They had kept her alive in combat zones. The restroom was located down a short hallway past the office area. As she washed her hands, she could hear the normal sounds of the bank, the soft murmur of customer conversations, the clicking of keyboards, the occasional ding of the cash register. Then everything changed. Cosmos was drying her hands in the restroom when she heard voices outside, Loud, angry voices that didn't belong in the quiet atmosphere of Millbrook Community Bank. "Everyone on the ground! Now! This is a robbery!" Her heart pounded. The suspicious car. The men inside. They had finally made their move, and she had been in the restroom when it happened. Eddie was probably confused and scared. The customers and staff were in danger. Quietly, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911, grateful that Millbrook was one of the few rural areas with reliable cell coverage. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Cosmos Martinez at Millbrook Community Bank on Main Street," she whispered. "Armed robbery in progress. Multiple suspects. People are being held hostage. I'm hidden in the back restroom. Are you safe where you are? For now, yes. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line and stay hidden. Do not attempt to intervene." Through the thin restroom door, Cosmos could hear what was happening. There were at least 2 male voices, maybe 3. They were demanding money and telling people to lie down. She could hear Janet's voice, steady but tense, trying to keep everyone calm. "Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt," one man shouted. His voice was young, probably early 20s. There was a tremor in it that suggested fear as much as aggression. Cosmos took a deep breath and tried to center herself. This was like being back in a combat situation, except the stakes were different. These weren't enemy soldiers. They were her neighbors, her friends, people she had come to care about over the past 2 years. She heard Janet's voice, shaky but brave. "The safe is on a time lock. It won't open until 2 p.m. "You're lying," a man yelled. A different voice from the first one, deeper, more aggressive. "I'm not lying. Check it yourself. Banks have security systems. The safe only opens at certain times." Cosmos realized Janet was buying time. Smart woman. Janet had been through bank robbery training when she became manager, and she was following protocol. Cooperate, don't be a hero, give them what they want, but use legitimate security procedures to slow them down. The operator whispered in her phone, "Officers are 3 minutes away. Do not try to be a hero, stay hidden." But Cosmos couldn't stay hidden. Not when her friends were in danger. Not when she had the training and experience to potentially help. She thought about Eddie, who had taken her place at the door and was probably terrified. She thought about Mr. Peterson, a 70-year-old veteran who had served in Vietnam and didn't deserve to be terrorized in his golden years. Cosmos quietly opened the restroom door just a crack. She could see into the main bank area through the gap, using a skill she'd learned in urban combat training: how to observe without being observed. 3 men in dark clothes and baseball caps. They had backpacks and were clearly nervous. None of them looked older than 25. One stood by the door, watching the street. That would be the lookout. Another was at the counter with Janet, demanding access to the safe. The third was keeping watch over the customers lying on the floor. She counted 7 people on the ground. Mr. Peterson, Sarah, Mrs. Chen, 2 other customers she recognized, and 3 bank employees, including Eddie, who looked confused and frightened. The man by the door kept checking his watch and looking nervously outside. "We need to move faster," he said. His role was clearly to watch for police and manage their escape route. "The safe won't open," the man at the counter replied. "She says it's on a timer." This one appeared to be the leader. He was slightly older than the others and was making the decisions. But his voice betrayed inexperience. This wasn't a professional criminal operation. The third man, watching the hostages, was the most nervous of the 3. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. His nervousness made him potentially the most dangerous. Scared people made unpredictable decisions. Cosmos studied their positions and began to form a tactical assessment. Her military training kicked in automatically. She began to identify their weaknesses, their blind spots, their likely escape routes. The man at the door was positioned to see police cars approaching from the main street, but he couldn't see the side street where backup might approach. The leader at the counter had his back partially to the office area where Cosmos was hidden. The nervous one watching hostages was positioned where he could see everyone on the floor, but he wasn't paying attention to the back of the bank. She noticed something important. None of them had actually shown weapons, though they claimed to be armed. They were using fear and intimidation, but she couldn't see any guns. This was either a very professional operation where weapons were concealed, or these were amateurs who were bluffing about being armed. Her phone buzzed with a text from the 911 operator. "Police 2 minutes away. Stay hidden." 2 minutes felt like forever when people's lives were at risk. Cosmos made a decision that went against her instructions, but aligned with her training and instincts. She couldn't just wait while her friends were terrorized, especially when she had skills that might help. She texted back, "We'll try to help from inside." 3 suspects, positions following. 1 at door, 1 at counter, 1 with hostages. No weapons visible yet. All appear young and inexperienced. The 911 operator immediately responded, "Do not engage, wait for officers." But Cosmos was already moving. Taking a deep breath, she opened the restroom door wider and stepped into the hallway. The back area of the bank had offices and storage rooms. If she could get to Janet's office, she might be able to activate additional security systems from there. Moving quietly, using skills she'd learned in urban combat environments, she made her way to Janet's office. The door was unlocked. Janet had been opening for the day when the robbery began. Inside, she found the security panel, a system she'd familiarized herself with during her 2 years working here. She activated every alarm she could find: silent alarm to the police station, panic button that alerted the security company, and emergency beacon that would bring additional backup. Most of these systems were probably already triggered, but redundancy was important in crisis situations. Through Janet's window, which faced the side street, she could see police cars approaching in the distance. They were still too far away to be noticed by the lookout at the front door, but they would be here soon. She heard one of the robbers getting more agitated. "Something's wrong. We should go. Now." The nervous energy in his voice suggested panic was setting in. In her experience, panicked people made dangerous decisions. "Not without the money," the leader replied. Cosmos realized they were about to reach a critical decision point. They could either escalate, potentially hurting people in their desperation to escape with something, or they could be guided toward de-escalation. Her military experience had taught her that the next few minutes would determine whether this ended peacefully or violently. Cosmos made another tactical decision. Rather than wait for the situation to deteriorate, she would attempt to control it. She took a deep breath, stepped out of Janet's office, and walked calmly into the main bank area. "Excuse me," she said in a clear, steady voice. All 3 men turned to look at her. The hostages on the floor looked up with surprise and fear. Janet's eyes widened. She clearly wanted to signal Cosmos to get back to safety, but couldn't speak without potentially aggravating the robbers. "Who are you?" the leader demanded. "Where did you come from?" "I'm Cosmos Martinez, head of security for this bank," she lied smoothly, using her military training in deception operations. "I was in the back office when you arrived." The man by the door was getting nervous. "We need to leave, now. This is taking too long." "Nobody's going anywhere until we get what we came for," the leader said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Cosmos walked slowly closer, keeping her hands visible and her movements non-threatening. Every step was calculated to appear confident but not aggressive. "Listen, you seem like smart guys. You know the safe is on a timer, that's true. But I can open the teller drawers. There's about $3,000 there. Take it and go before the police arrive." How do we know you're not lying? The leader asked. Because I want everyone to be safe, Cosmos replied, including you. Take the money from the drawers and leave. No one gets hurt, and you get away clean. She was buying time, but she was also offering them a face-saving exit strategy. Sometimes, de-escalation was about giving people a way to back down without losing dignity. The three robbers huddled together, whispering urgently. Cosmos could see them arguing about what to do. The lookout wanted to leave immediately. The nervous one was sweating more heavily. The leader was trying to maintain control of the situation. Janet, she said calmly, why don't you open the teller drawers? Let's give these gentlemen what they want so they can leave. Janet understood immediately. She stood up slowly and moved toward the teller area. It will take me just a minute to open each drawer. Fine, the leader said, but everyone else stays down. As Janet worked at the teller counter, Cosmos continued talking to keep the robbers calm and gather more information about their state of mind. You picked a good time, she said conversationally. Not much foot traffic on Thursday mornings. Smart planning. She was actually studying their body language and psychological state, looking for weaknesses and pressure points. The man by the door kept looking outside nervously. He was their weak link, most likely to panic. The one watching the hostages was sweating heavily and seemed to be having second thoughts about the whole operation. The leader was trying to act confident, but his hands were shaking slightly. These weren't professional criminals. They were amateurs, probably desperate for money. That made them both less dangerous and more unpredictable. Professional criminals had protocols and experience. Amateurs might do anything. This your first time? She asked casually. The leader glared at her. Shut up. I'm just saying you're handling this well. Keeping everyone calm. No unnecessary violence. Professional approach. She was using a psychological technique called mirroring, reflecting back to them the behavior she wanted to see. By describing them as professional and controlled, she was encouraging them to act that way. There, Janet said, placing stacks of bills on the counter. $3,200. The leader grabbed the money and stuffed it into his backpack. Cosmos noted that his movements were rushed but not practiced. This confirmed her assessment that they were inexperienced. Let's go, he said to his partners. But the man by the door suddenly shouted, Police! Police cars coming. Everything changed in that moment. The nervous energy that had been building throughout the robbery suddenly erupted into panic. You called the police! The leader yelled at Cosmos, his voice rising in pitch. The silent alarms are automatic, Cosmos said, staying calm despite the surge of adrenaline. They trigger when the teller drawers are opened outside normal procedures. This was partially true. There were automatic alarms, though she had also manually activated additional systems. But her goal was to keep them from feeling betrayed or trapped, which could lead to violence. The three men were panicking now. The one by the door ran toward the back exit. This way! Back exit! But Cosmos knew something they didn't. That exit has been locked since the renovation last month, she said. Security upgrade. This was true. The back exit had been sealed and the alarm system rerouted as part of recent improvements. She'd been involved in discussing the changes with Janet when they were installed. The leader spun around, angry and confused. You trapped us! No, Cosmos said firmly. I'm trying to help you. The police are here, but you haven't hurt anyone. You can still walk away from this safely. Through the front windows, she could see police cars taking positions around the building. Officers were getting out and taking cover behind their vehicles. In a small town like Millbrook, this was probably the biggest law enforcement response in years. Everyone stay calm, Cosmos said loudly, addressing both the robbers and the hostages. No one needs to get hurt here. The leader was breathing heavily, looking around frantically for options. What do we do now? This was the critical moment. These men were scared and cornered. They had few options and limited experience. Their next decision could determine whether everyone walked away safely or whether the situation became tragic. Cosmos realized that her military training in hostage situations was about to be tested in the most personal way possible. These weren't strangers in a foreign country. They were members of her adopted community, people whose lives mattered to her. "Here's what we're going to do," Cosmos said in her most authoritative voice. Her military training was taking over completely now. She had commanded troops in combat situations, and while this was different, the principles of leadership under pressure were the same. First, everyone is going to stay calm. Second, we're going to resolve this safely for everyone involved. She looked directly at the leader. "What's your name?" Why do you want to know?" "Because I want to help you get out of this without ruining your life." "What's your name?" The man hesitated, clearly conflicted between maintaining anonymity and the human need for connection. "Marcus," he finally said. "Okay, Marcus. I'm guessing you and your friends are here because you need money. Maybe you have debts. Maybe someone you care about needs medical help. Whatever the reason, you're not bad people. Bad people don't hesitate to hurt others, and you've been careful not to hurt anyone." Marcus looked surprised by her words. He had probably expected condemnation, not understanding. "The police outside don't know what kind of people you are," Cosmos continued. "But I can tell them. I can tell them you were respectful to the hostages, that no one was hurt, that you're willing to cooperate." She gestured toward the front door, where they could see officers taking positions. Right now, they're probably assuming the worst. They're preparing for armed and dangerous criminals who might hurt innocent people. But if you surrender peacefully, this becomes a very different story. One of Marcus's partners spoke up for the first time. "What if they arrest us?" "They will arrest you," Cosmos said honestly. "I won't lie to you about that." But there's a big difference between armed robbery and attempted robbery where no one was hurt. There's a difference between fighting the police and cooperating with them. She could see that her words were having an impact. The three men were listening, considering their options rather than just panicking. A voice came from outside through a megaphone. "This is Millbrook Police. We have the building surrounded. Send out the hostages and surrender peacefully." Marcus looked terrified. His two partners were looking to him for direction, but he clearly didn't know what to do. This was far beyond anything they had planned for. Cosmos made a decision that would either help resolve the situation or put her in greater danger. "Marcus, I'm going to go talk to the police. I'm going to tell them that you're ready to surrender, that no one has been hurt, and that you're cooperating." "Wait," Marcus said. "How do we know they won't just rush in here?" "Because I'm going to make sure they don't," Cosmos replied. "I used to be military. I understand how these situations work. Trust me." The word trust hung in the air. She was asking three bank robbers to trust her, and implicitly offering to trust them not to hurt anyone while she was outside negotiating. "Why would you help us?" the nervous partner asked. "Because I believe people can make better choices when they're given better options," Cosmos said. "And because everyone in this room, including you three, deserves to go home safely today." She walked slowly toward the front door, her hands clearly visible. "I'm coming out!" she called. "I'm bank security!" The police officers outside tensed as she emerged, weapons trained on the doorway until they could confirm she wasn't a threat.
"Officer," she said to the nearest policeman, "I'm Cosmos Martinez, bank security." 3 suspects inside, 7 hostages. No one has been hurt. The suspects are young, scared, and ready to surrender if they're treated fairly. The police sergeant approached her. He was a man in his 40s who looked like he had experience, but probably not with situations this complex. Are they armed? I haven't seen any weapons. They used intimidation and fear, but I don't believe they're actually armed. They're not professional criminals. They're desperate kids who made a bad choice. What do they want? They already got what they came for, about $3,000 from the teller drawers. Now they just want to get out of this safely. The sergeant looked uncertain. This wasn't the typical criminal scenario they trained for. What are you suggesting? Let me go back in and bring the hostages out first. Then help the suspects surrender peacefully. They're scared, not dangerous. If we treat them like dangerous criminals, they might become dangerous. If we treat them like people who made a mistake, they'll act like people who want to make things right. I want to go back in, Cosmos told the sergeant. Let me bring the hostages out first, then help the suspects surrender. The sergeant looked uncertain. That's not standard procedure. I know, but these aren't standard criminals. They're desperate, not dangerous. Give me 10 minutes. Another officer joined the conversation. What's your background? Why should we trust your assessment? 15 years military, including urban combat and hostage situations. I've seen the difference between people who want to hurt others and people who are just trying to survive. These are the second type. After a brief discussion with his team, the sergeant agreed. 10 minutes. Then we come in whether the situation is resolved or not. Cosmos walked back into the bank. Everyone was exactly where she had left them. The three robbers looked at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Marcus, she said, the police have agreed to let me bring the hostages out first. Then you three will surrender at the front door. They've promised no one will be hurt if you cooperate. How do we know you're telling the truth? One of the other robbers asked. Because I could have stayed outside and let them handle it however they wanted, Cosmos replied. Instead, I came back in here. I came back because I gave you my word. She turned to the hostages. Mr. Peterson, Sarah, everyone, I want you to stand up slowly and walk to the front door. The police are waiting outside to make sure you're okay. One by one, the hostages stood up and walked out. Mr. Peterson paused as he passed Cosmos. Thank you, he whispered. Eddie, the maintenance worker, was the last to leave. You're brave, he told her quietly. Now only she and the three robbers remained in the bank. This was either going to end peacefully or things were about to get much worse. Your turn, Cosmos said to Marcus and his partners, but Marcus was shaking his head. What if this is a trick? What if they arrest us and throw us in prison forever? Marcus, Cosmos said gently, you're already in trouble. The question is, how much trouble do you want to be in? She sat down in one of the customer chairs, making herself less threatening and more approachable. Tell me why you did this. Marcus looked at his partners, then back at her. The tough facade was cracking, and underneath was a scared young man. My daughter needs surgery. The insurance won't cover it. We needed $20,000 and we thought... You thought this was the only way, Cosmos finished. I understand, but this isn't the only way. There are programs, charities, payment plans, people who will help. She could see tears in Marcus's eyes now. We tried everything. Nobody would help. They said we made too much money to qualify for assistance, but not enough to pay for the surgery. This was a story Cosmos had heard before. People caught in the gap between poverty programs and middle-class resources, facing medical bills that could bankrupt a family. What kind of surgery? She asked. Heart surgery. She's 8 years old. Without it. He couldn't finish the sentence. Cosmos felt her own eyes welling up. Here was the real story behind the bank robbery. Not greed or criminality, but a desperate father trying to save his child's life. Marcus, I promise you, we will find a way to help your daughter. But first, You need to get through today. And the only way to do that is to walk out that door with your hands up and cooperate with the police. One of the other robbers spoke up. What about us? We don't have sick kids. What's your story? Cosmos asked.
I'm Marcus's cousin. I couldn't let him do this alone. The third one said, I owe money to some bad people. They said if I didn't pay them back. So it was family loyalty and debt fear. Not professional criminality, just people in desperate situations making desperate choices. Here's what I know about Millbrook, Cosmos said. This is a community that takes care of its own. If we can resolve this peacefully, people will want to help. But first, you need to give them a reason to help rather than a reason to fear you. The front door of the bank opened slowly. Marcus walked out first, his hands raised high above his head. The police officers were ready, but they didn't rush forward aggressively. Cosmos had clearly communicated the situation effectively. I'm surrendering, Marcus called out. We're all surrendering. The other two men followed, also with their hands up. Finally, Cosmos emerged behind them. That's all of them, she announced. 3 suspects, all cooperating. The police moved in carefully and professionally. They handcuffed the 3 men, but there was no violence, no shouting. Everything happened calmly, just as Cosmos had promised. As they were being led to the police cars, Marcus looked back at Cosmos. My daughter's name is Sophia, he said quietly. Will you really help her? I promise, Cosmos said. The sergeant approached Cosmos. Good work in there. How did you know they weren't dangerous? Military training, she replied. You learn to read people under pressure. These were scared kids, not hardened criminals. Well, you probably saved lives today, both theirs and the hostages. As the police cars drove away, the hostages began thanking Cosmos. Mr. Peterson shook her hand. Sarah hugged her. Janet was crying with relief. I can't believe how calm you were, Janet said. It was like you were born for this. Cosmos smiled sadly. Maybe she was born for this. Maybe this was where she belonged. Not flying helicopters in war zones, but protecting people in peaceful communities. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Police detectives wanted detailed statements. FBI agents arrived to investigate the interstate aspects of the case. Reporters from the county newspaper showed up, followed by television crews from the state capitol. But through it all, Cosmos kept thinking about Marcus's daughter Sophia, a 8-year-old girl who needed heart surgery, a father who had risked everything because he saw no other options. During a break in the interviews, she pulled out her phone and started making calls. First, she called the Veterans Affairs Hospital, where she had received treatment for her PTSD. They had social workers who might know about resources for families facing medical crises. Next, she called her former military unit. Military families often faced similar challenges, and there were organizations dedicated to helping them. Then she called Janet. I need to ask you something personal. Do you know anything about Marcus's family situation? His daughter? I know he has a daughter, Janet said. I've seen her at community events. Sweet little girl. I didn't know she was sick. She needs heart surgery. That's why he robbed the bank. There was silence on the phone. Then Janet said, We need to help them. I was hoping you'd say that. By evening, Cosmos had connected with 3 different charitable organizations, a children's hospital that did pro bono work, and a crowdfunding specialist who helped families raise money for medical expenses. But she also did something else. She called the police station and asked to speak with Marcus. The Millbrook Police Station was a small building that served the entire county. It wasn't equipped for long-term detention, so Marcus and his partners would be transferred to the county jail the next day. But for now, they were being held in temporary cells while the paperwork was processed. "He asked to see you," the desk sergeant told Cosmos. "Said you made him a promise." Marcus was sitting on the narrow bench in his cell when Cosmos arrived. He looked young and scared, more like a kid who had been caught shoplifting than a dangerous criminal. "You came," he said. "I keep my promises," Cosmos replied. "I've been making calls about Sophia. I think we can help." She explained what she had learned. There was a children's hospital 3 hours away that specialized in pediatric heart surgery. They had a program for families who couldn't afford treatment. There were also charitable organizations that could help with travel and lodging costs. "The hospital wants to see Sophia's medical records," Cosmos said. "If you give me permission, I can have them transferred." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this?" "I robbed your bank." "No," Cosmos said. "You made a desperate choice because you love your daughter. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable." She leaned closer to the cell bars. "Marcus, I want you to listen to me carefully. What you did today was wrong, but it doesn't define who you are. You can still be the father Sophia needs you to be. You can still be a good man." "How?" "I'm going to prison." "Maybe. But even if you do, it doesn't have to be the end of your story. I've seen people overcome worse mistakes than this." The desk sergeant approached. "Visiting time is up," he said gently. "Wait," Marcus called out as Cosmos prepared to leave. "What happens to my family while I'm dealing with this?" "Your wife and Sophia won't be alone," Cosmos promised. "The community will help. That's what communities do." As she walked out of the police station, Cosmos realized she had just made a commitment that went far beyond anything in her job description. But it felt right. It felt like what she was meant to do. The next morning, the story was front-page news in the county newspaper. "Local security guard prevents bank robbery violence." But the story that emerged wasn't the typical crime narrative. Instead, it focused on de-escalation, community support, and the human stories behind desperate actions. Cosmos arrived at work to find a crowd gathered outside the bank. She initially worried it might be curiosity seekers or protesters, but as she got closer, she realized something different was happening. "We want to help," said Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who walked her dog past the bank every morning. "We heard about the little girl who needs surgery." "I brought this," said Tom the mailman, holding an envelope. "It's not much, but it's something." Within an hour, there was an impromptu fundraising effort happening on the sidewalk outside the bank. People were bringing cash, checks, and pledges. The local radio station had picked up the story and was broadcasting appeals for donations. Janet watched from inside the bank, amazed. "I've lived here my whole life," she told Cosmos, "and I've never seen anything like this." "People want to help," Cosmos replied. "They just need to know how." By noon, they had raised over $8,000. The local hospital called to say they were waiving their fees for Sophia's pre-surgical evaluation. A regional charity committed to covering any costs not covered by the fundraising. But the most important call came from the Children's Hospital. After reviewing Sophia's medical records, they had scheduled her for surgery the following week. The entire cost would be covered by their charitable care program and the community donations. Cosmos drove to Marcus's house to deliver the news to his wife, Elena. Elena Martinez lived in a small apartment on the edge of town with 8-year-old Sophia. When Cosmos knocked on the door, Elena answered with red eyes and a wary expression. "Are you the woman from the bank?" Elena asked. "Yes, I'm Cosmos. I wanted to talk to you about Sophia." Elena invited her in, and Cosmos immediately saw why Marcus had been so desperate. Sophia was a beautiful child, but she was pale and obviously weak. She was sitting on the couch with a coloring book, but even that small activity seemed to tire her. "Sophia, this is Miss Cosmos," Elena said. "She's a friend." Sophia looked up with large, dark eyes. "Are you the lady who helped my daddy?" Cosmos sat down beside her. "I tried to help everyone yesterday, including your daddy. Is he in trouble?" The question broke Cosmos's heart. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father committed a crime to try to save her life? "Your daddy made a mistake," Cosmos said carefully. "But he made it because he loves you very much." Sometimes people make mistakes when they're scared. Sophia nodded seriously. "I know he loves me. He reads to me every night, even when he's tired from work." Elena sat down across from them. "The doctors say she needs surgery soon." Without it, she couldn't finish the sentence in front of her daughter. "I have good news," Cosmos said. "The surgery is scheduled for next week. Everything is going to be paid for." Elena stared at her. "What? How?" Cosmos explained about the hospital's charitable program and the community fundraising. As she talked, Elena began to cry. "I don't understand," Elena said. "Marcus robbed the bank. Why would people want to help us?" "Because you're part of this community," Cosmos said. "Because Sophia is a child who needs help. Because people understand that sometimes good people make bad choices when they're desperate." Sophia looked back and forth between the two women. "Am I going to get better?" "Yes, sweetheart," Cosmos said. "You're going to get much better." The following Monday, Marcus and his two partners appeared in court for their arraignment. Cosmos had spent the weekend working with a local attorney who specialized in helping people who couldn't afford legal representation. The attorney, David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, who had returned to Millbrook after law school, had agreed to represent all three men pro bono after hearing their stories. "This is a unique case," he told Cosmos before the hearing. "The defendants cooperated fully. No one was hurt, and there are significant mitigating circumstances. I think we can work something out." In court, the prosecutor outlined the charges: attempted bank robbery, conspiracy, and several lesser offenses. The maximum penalty could be 10 to 15 years in prison. But then, David Chen presented his case. He called Cosmos as a character witness, and she testified about the defendants' cooperation and the circumstances that led to their actions. "Your Honor," she said, "these men made a terrible mistake, but they are not dangerous criminals. Marcus was trying to save his daughter's life. His cousin was trying to help family. The third defendant was caught in a cycle of debt and fear. They need help, not just punishment." The prosecutor, surprisingly, didn't object strongly to Chen's arguments. "The state acknowledges the unusual circumstances of this case," he said. "We're willing to consider alternative sentencing if the defendants are willing to make full restitution and accept responsibility for their actions." The judge, an older woman who had been on the bench for 20 years, listened carefully to all the arguments. "This is indeed an unusual case," she said finally. "I'm going to postpone sentencing for 30 days to allow for a full background investigation and to see how the defendants respond to pretrial release with community service requirements." All three men were released on their own recognizance, with the requirement that they perform 40 hours of community service per week until sentencing. The Children's Hospital was 3 hours away in the state capital. Cosmos offered to drive Elena and Sophia, and Elena gratefully accepted. "I don't know how to thank you," Elena said as they drove through the early morning darkness. Sophia was asleep in the back seat, clutching a stuffed bear that the community had given her. "You don't need to thank me," Cosmos replied. "This is what people do for each other. But you barely know us." Cosmos thought about that. It was true. She had only lived in Millbrook for 2 years, and she hadn't known the Martinez family before the bank robbery. But somehow, that didn't matter. I know what it's like to be in a situation where you feel like you have no options, she said finally. I know what it's like to need help. At the hospital, Sophia was brave during the pre-surgical procedures. The medical team was impressed by her resilience and positive attitude. She's a fighter, the surgeon told Elena. The surgery should go very well. During the 6-hour operation, Cosmos stayed with Elena in the waiting room. They talked about everything and nothing. Elena's job at the local grocery store, Sophia's favorite books, Marcus's work as a mechanic before the recession forced him to take lower-paying jobs. He's a good man, Elena said. When the insurance company denied the surgery and we couldn't get approved for loans, he started to panic. He felt like he was failing as a father. He's not failing, Cosmos said. He's human. When the surgeon finally emerged with good news, both women cried with relief. The surgery had been successful. Sophia's heart was repaired, and her prognosis was excellent. She'll need some recovery time, the surgeon explained, but she should be able to live a completely normal life. That evening, as Sophia slept peacefully in her hospital bed, Elena called Marcus at the county jail to tell him the news. She's going to be okay, Cosmos heard Elena say. Your little girl is going to be fine. While Sophia recovered in the hospital, Marcus and his partners began their community service in Millbrook. The judge had allowed them to serve their hours locally, which meant they were working alongside the same people they had terrorized just weeks before. Marcus was assigned to help with maintenance at the elementary school. His mechanical skills made him valuable for repairs and upkeep that the school district couldn't afford to hire professionals to do. Isn't it weird having him here? One teacher asked the principal. Not really, the principal replied. He's working hard, he's good with tools, and the kids like him. That's what matters. His cousin Tony was assigned to help at the food bank, sorting donations and preparing packages for families in need. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He was now helping families exactly like his own, families struggling to make ends meet. The third member of their group, Jake, was working with the Parks Department, cleaning up public spaces and maintaining walking trails. All 3 men approached their community service with determination. They seemed to understand that this was their chance to prove they belonged in the community rather than behind bars. Cosmos made a point of checking on their progress. She visited Marcus at the school one afternoon and found him repairing playground equipment while a group of children watched. Are you the man who made a mistake? One little girl asked him directly. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he answered honestly. Yes, I made a big mistake. My mom says everyone makes mistakes sometimes, the girl replied. Did you learn from yours? I'm trying to, Marcus said. Cosmos watched this exchange with interest. The children's acceptance was immediate and uncomplicated. It was the adults who struggled with forgiveness and second chances. Sophia returned home after a week in the hospital, weak but healing well. The community response continued to be overwhelming. Neighbors brought meals. The local bookstore organized a reading program where volunteers came to read to Sophia during her recovery. The high school art class made cards and drawings to decorate her room. Cosmos visited regularly, often finding the small apartment filled with visitors. Sophia was becoming something of a local celebrity, the brave little girl whose medical crisis had inadvertently brought the community together. Look what I can do, Sophia said during one of Cosmos's visits, demonstrating how she could walk around the apartment without getting out of breath. That's wonderful, Cosmos said. How are you feeling? Much better. And guess what? Daddy might come home soon.
Elena looked at Cosmos over Sophia's head. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, and despite the community support, there was no guarantee that Marcus wouldn't receive jail time. "We're hoping for the best," Elena said carefully. That evening, as Cosmos prepared to leave, Sophia pulled her aside. "Miss Cosmos, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you help us? Even after Daddy did something bad?" Cosmos knelt down to Sophia's level. "Because everyone deserves help when they need it. Because your daddy loves you very much. And because that's what friends do." "Are we friends?" "Yes, we are." Sophia hugged her tightly. "Thank you for being my friend." The courtroom was packed for the sentencing hearing. Half the town seemed to be there, along with reporters from several newspapers and a television crew from the state capitol. David Chen had prepared character witnesses from throughout the community. The elementary school principal testified about Marcus's work ethic and how well he interacted with children. The food bank coordinator spoke about Tony's dedication and positive attitude. The Parks Department supervisor praised Jake's reliability and initiative. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Mr. Peterson, the elderly veteran who had been in the bank during the robbery. "Your Honor," he said, "I served in Vietnam. I know what fear looks like, and I know what evil looks like. What I saw in that bank wasn't evil. It was fear and desperation. These young men were scared, not malicious." He gestured toward Marcus. This man's daughter was dying, and he felt like he had no other options. "I'm not saying what he did was right, but I understand why he did it. And I've seen what he's done since then. The work, the remorse, the commitment to making things right." Mr. Peterson paused and looked directly at the judge. "Sometimes the measure of a person isn't their worst moment, but what they do after that moment. These men have shown who they really are, and they deserve a chance to continue showing it." Elena testified next, describing the financial pressures that had led to Marcus's desperate decision and the community support that had saved Sophia's life. Finally, Marcus, Tony, and Jake each spoke on their own behalf. Marcus's statement was simple, but powerful. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I scared innocent people, including my friends and neighbors. I risked everything that mattered to me. But I also learned something important. This community will help people who are struggling if they just ask. I should have asked for help instead of trying to take what I needed. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for that mistake and helping other people avoid making the same one." The judge deliberated for nearly an hour before returning to deliver her sentence. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. "This case has been unlike any I've presided over in 20 years on the bench," she began. "The defendants committed serious crimes that could have resulted in tragedy. However, the circumstances surrounding these crimes, the defendants' cooperation, and their behavior since their arrest present compelling grounds for alternatives to traditional incarceration." She looked at each of the three men. "Mr. Martinez, Mr. Santos, Mr. Williams, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years probation, with the requirement that you complete 1,000 hours of community service and participate in financial counseling programs. You will also establish a restitution fund to reimburse the bank for any costs associated with this incident." The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge called for order. "Furthermore," she continued, "I am recommending that you three work with local social services to develop programs that help other families facing medical or financial crises. Your experience gives you unique insight into how desperation can lead to poor decisions and how communities can provide alternatives to crime." As the hearing concluded, Marcus found Cosmos in the crowd. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." "Thank you for trusting me," she replied, "for choosing to surrender peacefully, for showing this community what second chances can accomplish." 6 months after the bank robbery, Millbrook had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The crisis that could have divided the community had instead brought it together. Marcus, Tony, and Jake had not only completed their required community service hours, but had continued volunteering on their own time. They had helped establish the Millbrook Family Crisis Fund, a community-supported program that provided emergency assistance to families facing medical bills, job loss, or other financial emergencies. The idea is to give people options before they reach the point of desperation, Marcus explained to a reporter from the state newspaper who was writing a follow-up story. Nobody should have to choose between their family's well-being and the law. Sophia had returned to school and was thriving. Her surgery had been completely successful, and she was now able to participate in normal childhood activities for the first time in her life. Elena had been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store, partly because of her increased visibility in the community, but mostly because of her hard work and dedication. Cosmos found herself in an unexpected role as an informal community coordinator. People came to her with problems, knowing that she had connections and resources throughout the area. The bank had given her a raise and expanded her responsibilities to include community outreach and security consultation. "You've become quite the local celebrity," Janet observed one morning as they opened the bank together. "That wasn't the plan," Cosmos replied. "The best things usually aren't planned," Janet said. "They just happen when the right person is in the right place at the right time." The story of the Millbrook Bank robbery and its aftermath had spread far beyond the small town. Cosmos received invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences about de-escalation techniques. Social workers wanted to learn about community-based crisis intervention. Even military groups were interested in her approach to conflict resolution. "The key isn't having all the answers," she told an audience of police officers from across the state. "The key is listening for the real problem behind the immediate crisis." Marcus wasn't really a bank robber. He was a father trying to save his daughter. Once I understood that, I could work with his motivation rather than against it. During the question and answer session, a detective from a large city asked, "But how do you know when someone is genuinely desperate versus just making excuses?" "Experience helps," Cosmos replied, "but mostly it's about staying alert and trusting your training." In Marcus's case, everything about his behavior suggested inexperience and fear rather than criminal intent. He was sweating, his voice was shaking, and his partners were clearly following his lead reluctantly. Professional criminals don't act like that. Another officer raised his hand. "What if you had been wrong? What if they had been dangerous?" "That's always a risk," Cosmos acknowledged. "But in my experience, treating people as dangerous makes them more likely to become dangerous. Treating them as human beings in crisis gives them a chance to make better choices." After her presentation, several departments requested training sessions on community-based policing and crisis de-escalation. The success of the Millbrook Family Crisis Fund attracted attention from social service agencies throughout the region. Within a year, similar programs were being established in 6 other communities, all based on the model that had emerged from the bank robbery incident. Cosmos found herself consulting on these programs, helping other communities develop their own approaches to prevention-based social services. "The principle is simple," she explained to a group of community leaders from a neighboring county. "Instead of waiting for people to commit crimes and then punishing them, we identify families in crisis early and provide support before desperation leads to poor decisions." The program had prevented an estimated 12 potential crimes in its first year, according to local law enforcement. More importantly, it had helped over 40 families avoid financial catastrophe. Marcus had become the program's most effective advocate, speaking at community meetings and helping other families navigate the available resources. "2 years ago, I thought robbing a bank was my only option," he told a group of local business leaders who were considering expanding their support for the program. "Today, I know there are always alternatives. The difference is having people who will help you find them." His transformation from criminal to community leader had become a powerful symbol of the program's potential. As Cosmos's role in the community expanded, she found herself confronting the trauma that had ended her military career 3 years earlier. Working with crisis situations again had initially triggered some anxiety, but it had also reminded her of her strengths and capabilities. She began seeing a counselor again, not because she was struggling, but because she wanted to understand how her past experiences were shaping her current work. "It sounds like the bank robbery allowed you to reclaim your identity as a protector," the counselor observed during one session. "I suppose it did," Cosmos agreed. "I had started to think that my trauma meant I couldn't help people anymore. But it turned out that my trauma actually made me better at understanding other people's crises." She had also started dating David Chen, the attorney who had represented Marcus and his partners. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect for each other's work. "You know what I admire about you?" David told her one evening as they walked through downtown Millbrook. "You see the potential in people, even when they can't see it themselves." "I learned that from experience," Cosmos replied. "People helped me see possibilities I couldn't see when I was struggling. Now I try to do the same for others." 2 years after the bank robbery, Cosmos was invited to develop a training program for the State Police Academy. The course, titled Community-Based Crisis Intervention, would teach new officers how to recognize and respond to situations where de-escalation might be more effective than traditional enforcement. "Law enforcement isn't just about catching criminals," she told her first class of police cadets. "It's about protecting communities. Sometimes the best way to protect a community is to help someone avoid becoming a criminal in the first place." She used the Marcus case as a central example, walking the students through her decision-making process during the bank robbery. "At every step, I had choices," she explained. "I could have stayed hidden and waited for backup. I could have treated the robbers as enemies to be defeated. Instead, I chose to see them as community members in crisis and look for ways to help everyone involved." One cadet raised his hand. "But what if they had been actually dangerous? What if they had hurt someone while you were trying to help them?" "That's the fundamental tension in this work," Cosmos acknowledged. "You have to balance compassion with safety. But in my experience, showing people respect and offering them alternatives makes them less likely to choose violence, not more likely." The training program became mandatory for all new officers in the state and was eventually adopted by police academies in 3 neighboring states. Sofia Martinez was now 10 years old and thriving. Her heart surgery had been completely successful, and she was able to participate in all the activities that had been impossible before her operation. She played soccer, took dance classes, and was an honor student at the elementary school where her father still volunteered. "I want to be a doctor when I grow up," she told Cosmos during one of their regular visits, "so I can help other kids like me." "That's a wonderful goal," Cosmos replied. "You'd make an excellent doctor. Will you help me figure out how to do it?" "Of course. But you have plenty of time to decide. You might change your mind about what you want to do." Sophia shook her head seriously. "I won't change my mind. I know what it's like to be scared about being sick. I want to help other kids not be scared." Her certainty reminded Cosmos of her own childhood decision to join the military. Some callings emerged early and remained constant throughout life. Marcus overheard their conversation. "She talks about you all the time," he told Cosmos. "You're her hero." "She's mine too," Cosmos replied. "Her courage during the surgery, the way she's handled everything. She's remarkable." "She gets that from her mother," Marcus said. "But I think she gets her sense of justice from watching what you did for our family." Cosmos realized that Sophia represented something important. The next generation of community leaders, shaped by the values of compassion and service that had emerged from the crisis. As the Millbrook model gained recognition, Cosmos began working with state officials to develop policy recommendations for community-based crime prevention. Traditional law enforcement is reactive, she explained to a legislative committee studying criminal justice reform. We wait for crimes to happen, then we respond, but many crimes are preventable if we address the underlying causes. She presented data from Millbrook and the other communities that had adopted similar programs. Crime rates had dropped significantly, but more importantly, community satisfaction and social cohesion had increased. The goal isn't just to reduce crime, she said. The goal is to build communities where crime is less likely to occur because people have support systems and alternatives. The committee was particularly interested in the cost-effectiveness of prevention versus punishment. It costs about $35,000 per year to incarcerate someone, Cosmos explained. Our family crisis fund operates on about $50,000 per year and serves an entire community. We're preventing crimes at a fraction of the cost of prosecuting them. The legislative session ultimately resulted in state funding for community crisis intervention programs in 20 rural counties. The success of the Millbrook model attracted attention from the federal government. Cosmos was invited to Washington, D.C. to testify before a House subcommittee on criminal justice reform. Standing before the representatives, she felt the weight of representing not just her own experience, but the experiences of communities across the country that were looking for alternatives to traditional crime and punishment approaches. The incident that started this journey was a bank robbery, she told the subcommittee. 3 young men made a desperate choice because they felt they had no other options. Traditional law enforcement would have focused on arresting and prosecuting them. We chose to focus on understanding why they made that choice and helping them find better alternatives. She outlined the results: no repeat offenses, successful community integration, and the development of programs that had prevented dozens of other potential crimes. The principle we discovered is simple but powerful, she continued. People who feel connected to their communities and have access to support systems are much less likely to commit crimes. People who feel isolated and desperate are much more likely to make poor choices. The testimony led to the inclusion of community crisis intervention funding in the next federal crime prevention bill. The Millbrook model began attracting international attention when a documentary filmmaker created a feature film about the bank robbery and its aftermath. The film, titled Second Chances, premiered at several international film festivals and won awards for its portrayal of community healing and restorative justice. Cosmos was invited to speak at conferences in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia about community-based approaches to crime prevention. The principles we discovered in Millbrook aren't unique to American culture, she told an audience in London. The human need for community, dignity, and second chances exists everywhere. The specific applications might vary, but the underlying approach can work in any society. A pilot program based on the Millbrook model was established in 3 communities in northern England, adapted to local conditions, but maintaining the core focus on early intervention and community support. The success of these international programs led to invitations for Cosmos to consult with governments in developing countries that were looking for alternatives to expensive and often ineffective prison systems. As Cosmos approached her 50th birthday, she began thinking about the long-term sustainability of the work she had started. The movement had grown beyond anything she had initially imagined, but it needed to continue evolving and expanding without depending on her personal involvement. She worked with universities to develop formal degree programs in community intervention and restorative justice. She helped establish a national training institute that could prepare the next generation of community crisis workers. Most importantly, she made sure that people like Marcus, individuals who had lived through crisis and transformation, were included as leaders and trainers in the programs. The people who have walked the path are often the best guides for others who are just starting the journey, she explained to a group of foundation directors who were considering funding for the training institute. Marcus had become the first graduate of the Community Intervention Certificate program at the State University. He was now working full-time as a family crisis coordinator, helping establish programs in communities throughout the region. 5 years ago, I was the worst thing that had happened to Millbrook in decades, he said at the Training Institute's dedication ceremony. Today, I'm proud to be helping other communities build the kinds of support systems that saved my family. On a quiet Sunday morning, exactly 5 years after the bank robbery, Cosmos sat on her apartment balcony with a cup of coffee, looking out over Millbrook. The town looked much the same as it had when she first arrived, but she knew how much had changed beneath the surface. The Crisis Intervention Center that had grown out of the family fund was now operating out of a renovated building downtown. Marcus worked there full-time, along with 3 other staff members and dozens of volunteers. They had helped over 200 families avoid financial catastrophe and had prevented an estimated 30 potential crimes. Sofia Martinez was now 11 years old and continued to thrive. She had started a pen pal program connecting children in the hospital with kids in her school, showing the same spirit of service that had emerged from the crisis that brought her family to community attention. Elena Martinez had been promoted again and was now the store manager. She had also been elected to the town council, where she advocated for policies that supported working families. The 3 men who had robbed the bank 5 years ago were now respected members of the community. Marcus had become a regional leader in crisis intervention. Tony ran a job training program for people transitioning out of poverty. Jake had started a landscaping business that employed several people who had struggled to find work elsewhere. Cosmos thought about her own journey from that traumatic military mission to this moment. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but every step had led her exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Beautiful morning? Want to go for a walk?" She smiled and texted back, "Meet you at the park in 10 minutes. David had proposed 3 months ago, and they were planning a small wedding in the fall. It would be the first time Cosmos had allowed herself to believe in a permanent future since her military trauma. Even as the Millbrook model celebrated its successes, new challenges emerged that tested its principles and adaptability. The opioid crisis hit rural communities particularly hard, bringing types of addiction and associated crimes that were more complex than the program had previously addressed. We're seeing families destroyed by addiction in ways that financial counseling and job training can't solve, Marcus reported during a monthly staff meeting at the Crisis Intervention Center. Cosmos nodded. Every success creates new challenges. As we solve some problems, other problems become more visible, or new ones emerge. They developed partnerships with medical professionals and addiction specialists to address the growing crisis. The approach remained the same: early intervention and community support. But the specific strategies had to evolve. A particularly challenging case involved a young mother who had started using prescription painkillers after a car accident and had progressed to heroin when her prescription ran out. Traditional law enforcement would have focused on arrest and prosecution. The crisis intervention team focused on getting her into treatment while ensuring her children were cared for. The principle doesn't change, Marcus observed. People in crisis need support, not punishment. But addiction is a different kind of crisis that requires different kinds of support. The case was ultimately successful. The young mother completed treatment and was reunited with her children. But it required 6 months of intensive support from multiple agencies and volunteers. As the program matured, Cosmos began focusing on training the next generation of community interventionists. She developed a formal mentorship program that paired experienced practitioners with newcomers. Her most promising student was Alex Rivera, a young social worker who had grown up in an urban environment but was passionate about community-based approaches to social problems. "What's the most important lesson you've learned?" Alex asked during one of their weekly mentoring sessions. "That every person has a story," Cosmos replied. The person causing problems today might become your most effective volunteer tomorrow. Your job is to help them bridge that gap. Alex was initially skeptical about the approach. In my previous job in the city, we dealt with a lot of repeat offenders, people who kept making the same mistakes over and over. Tell me about a time when you changed, Cosmos challenged. A time when you learned from a mistake and became better.
Alex thought for a moment. When I was in college, I was struggling academically and started skipping classes. I was about to drop out when a professor reached out to me. Instead of lecturing me about responsibility, she asked what was wrong and helped me find resources to address my problems. And here you are, Cosmos said, a social worker dedicated to helping others. That professor saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself. That's what we're training you to do for others. By the end of their 6-month mentorship, Alex had become one of the program's most effective practitioners and was being recruited by other communities to help establish their own programs. As the community intervention programs approached their 5th anniversary, Cosmos worked with researchers from the State University to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of their impact. The quantitative results were impressive. A 45% reduction in property crime across participating communities, a 60% reduction in repeat offenses among program participants, and an 80% success rate in helping people avoid rearrest after completing crisis intervention. But the qualitative results were even more meaningful. Surveys showed that residents in participating communities felt safer, more connected to their neighbors, and more confident that help would be available if they faced personal crises. The numbers tell one story, Cosmos said at the anniversary celebration. But the real measure of our success is in the lives that have been transformed and the ripple effects of those transformations.
She gestured to the crowd gathered in the community center. Hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the program, either as participants or as community members who had benefited from living in a safer, more connected place. Marcus stepped forward to speak. 5 years ago, I was the worst thing that had happened to this town in decades. Today, I'm proud to be a contributing member of this community. That change was only possible because people like Cosmos chose to see my potential instead of just my mistakes. The audience applauded, but Marcus continued. The most important thing I want people to understand is that this wasn't just about giving me a second chance. It was about building a community where second chances are normal, where people support each other through difficulties, where problems are solved together instead of just punished. Sofia Martinez was now 12 years old and had become something of a local celebrity, not because of her father's past or her medical crisis, but because of her own remarkable character and achievements. She had started a youth volunteer program at the elementary school where younger children could get help with homework and social problems from older students. She had raised money for the children's hospital that had saved her life. Most remarkably, she had begun speaking at community events about the importance of forgiveness and second chances. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry at my daddy for what he did, she said during a presentation to the Rotary Club. But I'm not angry. I understand that he was scared and didn't know what else to do. What matters is what happened after, how the community helped us, and how Daddy learned to help other people. Her maturity and wisdom impressed everyone who heard her speak. College admissions officers were already contacting the family about scholarship opportunities, even though Sophia was still in middle school. She's going to change the world, Elena told Cosmos during one of their regular coffee meetings. She already has, Cosmos replied. Look at what her crisis led to. All the families we've helped, all the programs we've started. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest people. Sophia had maintained her goal of becoming a doctor, but had expanded it to include community medicine and working with underserved populations. She had already started studying Spanish so she could better communicate with immigrant families in the region.
The success of community intervention programs in multiple states led to their inclusion in federal crime prevention legislation. The Community Crisis Prevention Act provided funding for communities to establish programs based on the Millbrook model. Cosmos was invited to the White House for the bill's signing ceremony. Standing in the Rose Garden with other advocates for criminal justice reform, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small-town bank to the nation's capital. This legislation represents a fundamental shift in how we think about crime prevention, the president said during the ceremony. Instead of only responding to crime after it happens, we're investing in communities and families to prevent crime from happening in the first place. The bill provided $500 million over 5 years for community crisis intervention programs, with requirements that they include early identification systems, family support services, and community-based alternatives to incarceration. After the ceremony, Cosmos was approached by representatives from several international organizations interested in adapting the model for use in developing countries. The principles are universal, she told a delegate from the United Nations Development Program. Every society has families in crisis, and every community has the potential to support those families. The specific approaches might vary, but the underlying philosophy can work anywhere. Within 2 years of the federal legislation, programs based on the Millbrook model were operating in 12 countries across 4 continents. Each had been adapted to local cultural and economic conditions, but all shared the core principles of early intervention, community support, and belief in human potential for change. In Kenya, the program focused on preventing ethnic conflicts in mixed communities. In Brazil, it addressed gang recruitment in urban favelas. In Northern Ireland, it helped former paramilitaries transition to civilian life. In the Philippines, it worked to reduce family violence and community disputes. Cosmos traveled internationally as a consultant, helping establish and evaluate these programs. Each trip taught her something new about the universal human needs for dignity, community, and hope. The young man in Sao Paulo, who was recruited into a gang, has the same basic needs as Marcus did in Millbrook, she observed in her journal after visiting the Brazilian program. Security for his family, respect from his community, and a sense of purpose. When legal pathways to those things are blocked, people find illegal ones. Our job is to create and maintain those legal pathways. The international programs faced unique challenges: political instability, extreme poverty, ethnic conflicts. But they also demonstrated remarkable resilience and creativity in adapting the core principles to local conditions. As the movement expanded globally, the need for trained practitioners grew exponentially. Cosmos worked with universities around the world to develop formal degree programs in community intervention and restorative justice. The first graduating class of the master's program in community crisis intervention at Millbrook State University included students from 15 countries. Marcus served as a guest lecturer, sharing his perspective as someone who had experienced both sides of the criminal justice system. The most important thing you need to understand, he told the students, is that the people you'll be working with are just like you. They have families they love, dreams they're pursuing, and problems they're trying to solve. The only difference is that they've reached a point where they think they have no good options left. One student from Nigeria raised her hand. How do you maintain hope when you're working with people who keep making the same mistakes? By remembering that change takes time, Marcus replied. It took me 3 attempts at community college before I finally graduated. It took 2 years of probation before I really understood what I had put my family through. Some people need multiple chances before they're ready to change. Cosmos nodded approvingly. Marcus had become an excellent teacher because he combined lived experience with formal training and genuine empathy.
Cosmos and David were married in a small ceremony at the Millbrook Community Center, surrounded by friends from across the country and around the world. Sophia served as the flower girl. Marcus walked Cosmos down the aisle. Her military father had passed away 2 years earlier, and the reception featured speakers who shared stories about how the couple's work had changed their lives. 5 years ago, I thought my story as a protector was over, Cosmos said in her wedding speech. David helped me see that it was just beginning a new chapter. Together, we've learned that love isn't just a feeling between two people. It's a practice that can heal entire communities. The wedding gift they treasured most was a handmade book created by Sophia, containing letters from people around the world whose lives had been touched by the Millbrook model. Their honeymoon was spent visiting community intervention programs in Costa Rica and Colombia, combining their personal celebration with professional development and international relationship building. Not every intervention was successful, and Cosmos learned to accept that while the principles of second chances were sound, human nature was complex, and not everyone was ready to change. A particularly difficult case involved a young man named Derek, who had been arrested multiple times for drug-related offenses. Despite months of support from the crisis intervention team, Derek continued to struggle with addiction and kept making destructive choices. "I feel like we're failing him," Alex said during a team meeting. "We're not failing," Cosmos replied. "We're planting seeds. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts before someone is ready to change. Our job is to be here when he's ready." 6 months later, Derek was arrested again. But this time, instead of just cycling through the system, he specifically asked for help from the Crisis Intervention Program. "I wasn't ready before," he told Cosmos, "but I am now. I'm tired of this life. I want to change." Derek's recovery became one of their most challenging but ultimately rewarding cases. It took 2 years of intensive support, multiple setbacks, and enormous patience from the entire team. But eventually, Derek not only got clean, but became a peer counselor for other people struggling with addiction. "You never gave up on me," he told Cosmos during his 2-year sobriety celebration, "even when I gave up on myself." "That's what communities do," Cosmos replied. "We hold space for people until they're ready to fill it." The success of community intervention programs began influencing broader changes in criminal justice policy. Police departments adopted de-escalation training based on Cosmos's techniques. Courts developed alternative sentencing programs that emphasized restoration over punishment. Prisons implemented re-entry programs that connected former inmates with community support systems. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how society thinks about crime and punishment, observed Dr. Sarah Kim, a criminologist who had been studying the Millbrook model since its inception. The traditional approach treated crime as a failure of individual character that required punishment. The new approach treats crime as a symptom of social problems that require community solutions. The changes weren't without controversy. Some critics argued that the emphasis on support and second chances was soft on crime and failed to provide adequate deterrence or justice for victims. Cosmos addressed these concerns directly in her public speaking. "Justice isn't just about punishment," she said during a debate at the National District Attorney's Conference. "Justice is about making things right, protecting victims, holding offenders accountable, and preventing future crimes. Our approach does all three more effectively than traditional punishment alone." She pointed to the statistics. Communities with intervention programs had lower crime rates, higher victim satisfaction scores, and significantly lower recidivism rates than those relying primarily on incarceration. Sophia Martinez graduated from high school at age 16 as valedictorian and recipient of a full scholarship to the state medical school. Her graduation speech became an internet sensation when a video of it was shared widely on social media.
8 years ago, I was a sick little girl whose father made a terrible mistake trying to save my life, she said to the packed auditorium. Today, I'm healthy and about to start medical school because a community chose forgiveness over revenge, healing over punishment, and hope over fear. She looked directly at Cosmos, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. Miss Cosmos taught us that heroes aren't people who never make mistakes. Heroes are people who help others learn from their mistakes and become better than they were before. Sophia's acceptance into medical school at such a young age attracted national media attention, but she handled the publicity with the same grace and wisdom she had shown throughout her young life. During her interview with a national news program, she was asked about her father's past. "My daddy made a mistake when he was scared and desperate," she said calmly. But that mistake led to something beautiful. A whole community learning how to help each other better. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things that happen for everyone else. The global impact of the Millbrook model led to Cosmos receiving the United Nations Global Peace and Justice Award. Standing before the General Assembly in New York, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small-town bank to this international stage. 7 years ago, I was a security guard who helped stop a bank robbery, she began. Today, I'm here because that bank robbery taught us something important about human nature and community resilience. She told the story of Marcus and his partners, of the choice between treating them as enemies or as community members in crisis. The traditional approach would have focused on punishment and deterrence, she said. Our approach focused on understanding and redemption. Both approaches have their place, but we had forgotten how powerful redemption can be, both for individuals and for communities. She presented data from the 63 communities now using variations of the Millbrook model, showing consistent improvements in crime rates, community cohesion, and individual outcomes. The Millbrook model isn't just about crime prevention, she concluded. It's about building communities that are resilient, compassionate, and strong. It's about remembering that every person has the capacity for change, and every community has the power to support that change. The speech was broadcast globally and led to requests from governments and organizations around the world for assistance in implementing similar programs. As Cosmos approached her 55th birthday, she began preparing for the next phase of her life and work. The crisis intervention movement had grown beyond anything she had initially imagined, and it was time to ensure its continued evolution and expansion. She had established a foundation that would carry on the work, with Marcus as its executive director and a board that included people from around the world who had been involved in implementing the model. "The movement is bigger than any individual," she told the foundation's first board meeting. "My role now is to make sure it can thrive without me." The Foundation's first major initiative was to establish an international training institute that would prepare the next generation of community interventionists. Located in Millbrook but serving students globally, the institute would combine academic study with practical experience. Sophia, now in her second year of medical school, had been accepted into a joint degree program that would allow her to earn both an MD and a master's in community health. She planned to return to Millbrook after her training to establish a clinic that integrated medical care with social services. "Everything comes full circle," she told Cosmos during one of their regular mentoring sessions. "I'm going to help families avoid the kind of crisis my family went through." On a Thursday morning in October, exactly 7 years after the bank robbery, Cosmos stood once again at the front door of Millbrook Community Bank. But this time, she wasn't there as a security guard. She was there as the keynote speaker for the town's first annual Community Resilience Festival. The festival filled the entire downtown area. There were booths representing various crisis intervention programs, workshops on conflict resolution and community building, and presentations by people whose lives had been changed by the community's approach to redemption and healing. Marcus had a booth where he was registering people for the new Regional Training Institute. Sophia was leading a session on youth leadership development. Derek was speaking to teenagers about addiction prevention and recovery. But what struck Cosmos most was how normal it all seemed. The extraordinary work of community healing had become ordinary, woven into the fabric of daily life in Millbrook. As she prepared to give her speech, Cosmos looked out at the crowd and saw faces that represented every part of the journey. Janet and the other bank employees who had supported her from the beginning. The police officers who had learned to use community intervention in their daily work. The teachers who had implemented restorative justice programs in their schools. The business owners who had hired program participants and given them genuine second chances. She also saw visitors from dozens of other communities who had come to learn about the Millbrook model, and delegations from 6 countries who were planning to adapt the approach to their own contexts. 7 years ago, Cosmos began, 3 desperate young men made a terrible decision. They decided to rob this bank because they saw no other options for solving their problems. She gestured toward the bank behind her, its doors decorated with banners celebrating the festival. That decision changed everything, but not in the way they expected. Instead of destroying their lives and traumatizing our community, it became the catalyst for a transformation that none of us could have imagined. She told the story once again, but this time with the perspective of 7 years of growth and learning across multiple continents. We learned that the moment of crisis is also a moment of opportunity. We learned that communities have enormous power to shape outcomes when they work together intentionally. We learned that people's capacity for change, when properly supported, is virtually unlimited. She paused and looked directly at Marcus, who was standing near the front of the crowd with his daughter and wife. Marcus, would you like to add anything? Marcus stepped forward, clearly emotional. 7 years ago, I was the worst thing that had happened to this town in decades. Today, I'm proud to be leading the organization that emerged from that crisis. That change was only possible because people like Cosmos chose to see my potential instead of just my mistakes. The crowd applauded, but Marcus continued. The most important thing I want people to understand is that this wasn't just about giving me a second chance. It was about building a community where second chances are normal, where people support each other through difficulties, where problems are solved together instead of just punished. He gestured to the festival around them. This is what's possible when a community decides that everyone matters, that everyone can change, and that everyone deserves support in becoming their best self. Sophia stepped forward to join her father. Now 18 and preparing for her 3rd year of medical school, she had grown into a poised young woman whose wisdom belied her years. When I was 8 years old and needed heart surgery, my father made a terrible mistake because he loved me and was desperate to save my life, she said. That mistake could have destroyed our family and hurt this community. Instead, it became the beginning of something beautiful. She looked out at the crowd of hundreds of people from around the world. What happened here in Millbrook proves that there's always hope. There's always a possibility for redemption. And there's always a way to turn something bad into something good if enough people are willing to work together. As the speeches concluded and the festival continued around them, Cosmos found herself surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by the work that had started with a simple choice to see bank robbers as human beings in crisis rather than enemies to be defeated. 10 years later. 10 years after the bank robbery, Cosmos returned to Millbrook for the 10th anniversary celebration of what was now known as the Global Community Resilience Movement. She was 57 now, serving as senior advisor to the United Nations on community-based peacebuilding and traveling internationally to help establish programs in conflict zones and underserved communities. Millbrook had become an international destination for people studying community intervention and restorative justice. The Training Institute graduated hundreds of students each year, sending them to communities around the world. The town's population had grown to 8,000, but it had maintained its character and sense of community connection. The original crisis intervention program was now integrated into every aspect of community life. Schools used restorative justice practices exclusively. The police department had become a model for community-oriented policing. Local businesses participated in comprehensive hiring and mentoring programs. The hospital had developed protocols for identifying and addressing the social determinants of health problems. Crime rates had dropped to nearly zero. More importantly, community satisfaction and social cohesion scores were among the highest ever recorded in social science research. Young people who grew up in Millbrook went to college and careers carrying with them a deep understanding of how communities could support individual growth and positive change. Marcus was now the mayor of Millbrook, having been elected unanimously after serving 2 terms on the city council. His daughter Sophia had completed medical school and was doing her residency in pediatric cardiology at the same children's hospital that had saved her life. She planned to return to Millbrook to establish a clinic that would serve the region's underserved populations. Rebecca, the young woman who had struggled with addiction, had earned her doctorate in psychology and was running a statewide program for recovery support. Lisa had become a federal judge, known for her innovative approaches to restorative justice. During the anniversary celebration, Cosmos was asked to reflect on what she had learned over the past decade. "I learned that trauma doesn't have to be the end of your story," she said, looking out at an audience that included people from 6 continents who had traveled to Millbrook to celebrate the anniversary. "It can be the beginning of a new chapter, if you're willing to transform your pain into purpose." She paused, thinking about the young helicopter pilot she had been, the traumatized veteran she had become, and the global peace advocate she was now. "I learned that heroism isn't about being fearless or perfect. It's about showing up when you're needed, listening when others are speaking, and believing in people's capacity for change even when they can't believe in it themselves." A young journalist raised her hand. "What do you think is the most important legacy of the Millbrook model?" Cosmos smiled, looking at Sophia Martinez, now Dr. Sophia Martinez, who was sitting in the front row with her father and mother. "The most important legacy isn't a program or a policy," she said. "It's a generation of young people who grew up seeing forgiveness, redemption, and community support as normal parts of life. They're the ones who will carry these values into the future and adapt them to challenges we can't even imagine yet." After the celebration, as visitors from around the world began departing and the community began returning to its normal rhythms, Cosmos stood once more in front of the bank where it all began. A young girl approached her, the daughter of one of the international visitors who had come for the anniversary. "Are you the lady who stopped the bank robbers?" she asked in accented English. Cosmos knelt down to the girl's level, just as she had with Sophia 10 years earlier. "I'm the lady who helped some people find a better way to solve their problems. My teacher says you're a hero." "You know what I think?" Cosmos replied. "I think everyone can be a hero. It just means helping people when they need help and believing that everyone can change and grow." The girl nodded seriously. "I want to be a hero too." "I think you already are," Cosmos said. As she walked away from the bank for what she knew might be the last time in any official capacity, Cosmos reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with such trauma and fear. The scared young men who had felt they had no choice but to rob a bank had become productive community and international leaders. The traumatized former pilot, who thought her protective career was over, had become a global advocate for community healing and human dignity. The small town that had experienced its worst crisis had become a model of how communities could transform conflict into opportunity, fear into hope, and individual redemption into collective resilience. The story that had begun with desperation and trauma had become one of hope, transformation, and the infinite possibilities that emerge when people choose to see the best in each other and work together to make that best a reality. In the end, Cosmos realized that's what heroism really was. Not the absence of fear or failure, but the courage to keep believing in people's potential for good, even in the darkest moments, and the persistence to keep working toward a world where that potential could flourish. The bank robbery had lasted less than an hour. The transformation it sparked was still continuing, spreading to new communities and new generations around the world, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of faith in human dignity can create changes that echo across time and space, touching lives in ways that can never be fully measured or understood. Cosmos Martinez had learned to fly again, not helicopters, but human spirits toward their highest possibilities. And in teaching others to do the same, she had created a legacy that would continue long after her own story ended, carried forward by countless individuals who had learned that everyone deserves a second chance, and every community has the power to make those chances real. The sun was setting over Millbrook as Cosmos walked home to David, to their quiet life together, to the satisfaction of work well done and a future full of possibilities for continued service. Behind her, the lights were coming on in houses throughout the town, in the Crisis Intervention Center where Marcus was finishing his evening consultations, in the Training Institute where tomorrow's community healers were studying, and in Sophia's childhood home where dreams of healing and service continued to grow. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.